Hello, I'm John. Today I want to talk to you about some linear fills I do, and I've done some videos on them before on Facebook on the Beatty method. So some people are asking me to get more in depth with it, and I wanted to talk to you about how I incorporate my hand techniques with these linear fills I do. So the first technique is going to be 4 with our hands and 2 with our feet. And that is going to sound a lot like this. We're going to do it on the bass drum and our snare drum. We're going to keep it simple first. So here we go. And just try to pick up some speed and just get comfortable with that pattern until it starts to sound a little more like this. Now, with this simple technique, of course you can use it anywhere on the drum set. Mainly with the toms is where I like to use it. And the placement I like to use is my right hand on the snare and my left hand on the 10-inch tom, or whatever rack tom you might have, whatever you think might sound best. You can move it around and see where it's comfortable to you, and just see what works. So to keep it simple, keeping it in one spot, like I said earlier, I like to keep it on my snare and my rack tom. Just a nice, and if you're more comfortable playing with your right hand on the rack tom instead of on the snare, that's fine too. It doesn't make that much of a difference. So even if you're not used to playing a lot of double bass or a lot of double bass pedal, this is something that can hype up a song really easy if you play a lot of your original music. And even with a simple ride beat or groove that you might have, something like this. So as you can see, at one point in time, I split it up. I went digga digga, digga digga, ba, digga digga, digga digga, ba. You can do different things with these and, come up with your own patterns, of course. And it really depends on what you're playing, what kind of song it is, but it's just something I think that's really fun to kind of get the blood flowing. That being said, there's a lot of different ways you can move around the drum set, obviously. Another one I like to do a lot, 4 with the hands and 2 with the feet. Use the floor tom, rack tom, and snare, and I keep my left hand on the rack tom, and I move my right hand between the snare and my floor tom, and it sounds a lot like this. Here. Now, that being said, of course, once it starts to speed up, you start to see where it's kind of going, and it's a lot of fun to do. So that one's really fun to do, and there's also another variation of the same kind of pattern. Instead of going from the snare on the 1 every time again, 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4, staying on the floor tom, so it'll be like da 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 da. You know what I mean? It's a really fun pattern to just that right hand going back and forth, da 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 da. And this is what that sounds like. So now we're going to get into how I use my hand technique, my rolling technique with these linear fills. And for me, it's just something that came natural because of the way I roll. Again, if you look at my previous video where I have my drum pad, it talks a lot about my rolling technique and my hand technique that I use. So we're going to start on the snare again, and we're going to go back to the first pattern, our 4 with the hands and 2 with the feet. The only thing that's going to be different besides us rolling with our hands is with our feet, we're going to do a triplet. So a lot of people might think this is difficult, but a really nice way to get used to it, if you've been drumming a while, if you've been playing single pedal for a long time, doubles with your singles with your right foot, nice. Just nice doubles. You can turn it into a triplet really easily. The way I like to think of it, it's more of a quad because we're going to throw in our snare with our left or our right hand, either one. Think of it as one motion, just one motion. Don't think about it a lot, just like that. We're going to use that triplet technique with our quads. And once you hear it and once you give it a try, it'll all start to make sense. So with our hands, what we are doing is most people, when they do drum rolls, they usually end it with a single stroke. So if you're like, you're hitting those doubles. You're ending it with that single. Whenever I'm doing this with my hands, with linear fills, I keep that last hit a roll still. So again, 4 with our hands, rolling, and then triplet with it. It sounds a lot like this. So with 4 with the hands, that's the only one I really roll with, is something on the snare, something like that. You can move it around the toms and it gives a really cool effect. Just a lot of different kinds of ways. That might sound a lot like this. And you can obviously mess around with it and do your own thing with it. So the next thing I actually want to talk about is the same techniques where we were moving our snare back and forth from our floor tom. And this will include the same triplet pattern. To me, it just gives it more oomph, you know, instead of just... With the triplet, it sounds a little more full to me, and both of them sound like this when you add the triplet in. Again, feel free to experiment with these techniques. Recently I started using my chopper with my 10-inch splash or my floor tom with this 4 with the hands, 2 with the feet technique, or 3 with the feet, and it sounds really cool. So, again, feel free to try any combination. Some things work that you might not think would work. So that's all with 4 with the hands and 2 or 3 with the feet. Now I want to talk to you about how I do 2 with the hands and 2 with the feet. And again, yes, instead of it being just 2 with the feet, it is 3 with the feet as well. But I'm going to break it down and explain. You can get really fast doing only 2 with the feet with 2 with the hands. And it's a really good technique. It's one you should definitely practice. But one I use a lot with these triplets with my feet, it helps for even slower songs, slower tempos. And in my opinion, it just sounds really cool whenever it works. I've used this when doing some of the cover videos I've done. So, what we're going to start on is the snare, of course, again. And we're going to make it really simple. It's going to be, again, my hand technique with the rolling. And we're not going to single out the last note. We're just going to flutter it, almost kind of like a... And our feet, the triplets they don't need to be so fast like they were before. They don't need to be like that. They don't need to be like that. All they need to do is kind of more of a gallop, like this. I'm going to play as if I was playing on the snare, but I'm going to keep my left hand on my leg. So here we go. So, we can use this technique, of course, all over the kit, and it sounds really cool. Good warm-up for me is I like to go from my snare, my 8-inch, my 10-inch, back to the 8 and the snare, and repeat. So it's kind of back and forth, you know. And it's a linear fill, and it kind of, you know, seems like a line to me. And that sounds a lot like this. So, you can use this really easy as a quick fill, you know, somewhere, instead of just, you know, going down the snare to your toms, very common fill, especially learned by beginners. Instead of doing that kind of fill, maybe try using this linear fill. It can be a lot of fun in a lot of rock music, or I really feel like any kind of music where you would use a fill going down the set like that. Again, you can use this in a lot of different places. You feel free to use different cymbals or chimes even. I found using my splash with this fill can be a lot of fun. And that sounds a lot like this. Even my chopper, I seem to mess with it a lot when it comes to linear fills. You can come up with a lot of cool patterns. And again, that's just 2 with the hands and 2 with the feet. And then with the rolling technique and 3 with the feet. I'm trying to not hit this mic. So feel free to mess with it, of course. Mess with all these techniques. The last one I want to talk to you about, again, if you've seen the video from before, is a triple stroke roll that I do with my left hand. And I don't know why, it's something I've always done, but I use it in a lot of linear fills too. I don't know if you notice in some of the ways I end some things that I play, I'll just throw it in there. But I'm going to explain to you how I do it. And it's exactly, almost exactly, the same way I do a 2 with the hands and 3 with the feet on the snare. So I'll break it down for you. So it's a triple stroke roll with the left hand, followed with a hit with the right hand or left hand, whichever is more comfortable for you. And when we do this, it makes it a quad. So with that, is kind of how, instead of going, you kind of see a similarity. So I'll show you exactly. I'll first go like that, and then, you know. So when you're doing this, you can move around your right hand and add accents if you want. Sometimes I'll hit the bell on my right or something like that before followed up with the crash, and that sounds a lot like this. Sometimes it gives me a spot to rest if it's like a really fast, intense song and I'm just moving my limbs all crazy. I can add that as a fill somewhere just to give my right arm some time to relax, because a lot of us as drummers that play right-handed, our right hand really gets worn out sometimes. So it's just a nice little thing where that left hand can really get a good workout too. So... And that's pretty much it on these linear fills. I hope this has been helpful, and I hope a lot of you can use this in your own way and just have a lot of fun with it.